was elected at the story as well, and that's important. And as a mom, you better believe that is going to be my priority, because I look at that little boy every day, and our children don't deserve this deficit and this reckless spending, the excessive spending from Democrats.
Yeah, I don't have to promise or tell you what I'm going to do. I've done it. And I fought hard to get those balanced budget amendments, and there's a cost when you stand up and fight for something in Washington, D.C. And though I was elected by my colleagues to some strong leadership positions, 3 times I was picked over on the Ways and Means by underclassmen. Do you know the reason why? Is because I refused to vote for one of those omnibus or massive spending bills. Wouldn't do it, even though I know that it would come to personal costs. Even though I wouldn't have the DC super PAC or special interest money, because I drew a line in the sand. And listen, we have good conversations, and I hear the former governor talking about we've got to do this and we've got to do that. I'm the only one on this podium that had the guts to call out our two U.S. senators when they dared vote for that sham infrastructure bill. You got to do more than talk. You got to hold our own accountable.
Governor McCrory, rebuttal for 30 seconds.
Oh, did he refer to me? I missed the refer. Did you refer to me?
I just basically said, and I thank you for the extra time, that yes, I said part of calling out or holding the line is we as conservatives must hold our own accountable, and I am the only U.S. candidate that publicly has called out our U.S. senators when they vote for these massive spending bills. It takes more than talk, it takes action.
That's actually false. I did call out the senators on the infrastructure bill.
After they voted for it.
They had union requirements, and I'm the only candidate here who actually cut taxes. Cut your income taxes by a lot. I turned deficits into surpluses. I inherited a $2.3 billion deficit in unemployment and left Governor Cooper with a $4 billion surplus. No one else on this stage has come even close to successful achievement that made a difference in our state and in our nation, and jobs in North Carolina.
Ms. Eastman.
I'm not going to respond to that. Let's do the next question.
Senator Rick Scott, chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, introduced an 11-point plan for Republicans should they regain control of the U.S. Senate. And as we're talking about government spending, this plan includes cutting the government workforce by 25% and ensuring that, quote, all Americans should pay some income tax. What do you think of the plan? And if you support cutting the government workforce, please specify where you would cut that workforce. Mr. Walker.
Okay, yes. Let me follow up by correcting the former governor. He's not the only one. That we actually part of the leadership that put tax reform into play that lowered people's taxes across the country, not just in North Carolina. So I want to make that correction there. I applaud Senator Rick Scott. In fact, I think he needs to be the majority leader instead of Mitch McConnell moving forward. I will also add this part of it. When we did tax reform, we want to make sure that people that are working at their low-income brackets have a chance, the same opportunities that everyone else does. So we want to make sure that even though I approve Senator Rick Scott and some of the work that he's doing, I'm not there to say that every single person should pay taxes. I believe if you have an income, then absolutely that you should do. I was part of the Farm Bill that put taxation as well as 20 hours a week requirements for any 18 to 59-year-old able-bodied adult with no disabilities. So yes, we want to make sure, but before I sign on to blanket statements, I want to make sure that it's best for all North Carolinians.
Mr. McCrory.
Well, first of all, Rick Scott's a good friend of mine. He and I served as governor together. He's a great governor of Florida, and he's a great U.S. senator at this point in time. But what we don't need to do is talk about the need for more income taxes for anybody at this point in time. The problem's not needing more money, the problem is spending. And I've given you an example of giving free money out to everyone. I do know this, there's still a lot of fat in the bureaucracy. There is, as Donald Trump often mentioned, this bureaucracy. And I know it as a governor, I knew it as a mayor, and you've just got to start. When I became governor, I found people working in the unemployment division on unemployment. I found people that hadn't shown up to work in 3 months or 5 months or 6 months. We had to go hunt them down. There is a bureaucracy in every large organization, especially government, which you've got to toss out the non-productive people and demand more efficiency. And I did that as your governor in reducing spending in many areas and also reducing a lot of corruption that we had in DOT.
Ms. Eastman.
So it's so funny, both of these guys are like, well, I know Senator Scott, and he's my good friend, and this and that. But you know what I want to say about Senator Scott, which is really amazing? He's one of the 17 senators that's a veteran. And I know him too, by the way. And let me tell you about veterans. The last time we had a combat veteran as a U.S. Senator here in North Carolina, he served in World War II. It is time to send someone that has that boots on the ground wisdom in dealing with these issues. And I am glad that Senator Scott said, hey, I have a plan, because he's a businessman. I'm a businesswoman. I have a plan too. I like that. That's exactly what we should be doing. So yes, we need to be cutting taxes, not creating them. And when I say limited government, I mean, that's the idea. Yes, let's cut. We need limited government. So Senator Scott's a great person, isn't he?
I don't think he's endorsed anybody,
Yeah, I know, you guys are working on it.
including his great friends. Yeah. The other Senator Scott has, he's endorsed us for Senate.
Mr. Walker, you just endorsed,
Yeah.
sounds like you just endorsed Senator Scott of Florida for Majority Leader. 30 seconds for you, why you think that, and then 30 seconds to the other candidates, who you would support for Majority Leader in the Senate.
Look, all four candidates were asked the question the other day. I'm the only one that came out and said Mitch McConnell's wrong. Former governor 2 weeks ago said he agrees with Mitch McConnell. The problem is we're here talking about all this stuff that has to change. How are you going to change something unless you put new leadership into the pipeline? That's just, you just have to call it out for what it is. I don't think that Mitch McConnell was very happy the night on the House floor. I had a night that I called Get Moving Mitch. We've got to be able to stand up and do what we have to do to make sure the change is brought in this country that's needed.
Mr. McCrory?
Mitch McConnell brought a change at the Supreme Court working with Donald Trump that we desperately needed, and without his legislative skills, it wouldn't have happened. And thank God for the new majority in the Supreme Court, which we might need to finally get our election going right here in North Carolina. We need to, and this Supreme Court justice that, the very liberal Supreme Court justice that Biden just nominated, I would work with Mitch McConnell to ensure maybe we can get some Democratic votes to go, she's too radical for the United States of America and far too radical for North Carolina.
Ms. Eastman?
Well, I met with Mitch McConnell, Leader McConnell, before I announced my candidacy, and he and I have one thing in common that we want to be laser focused on, and it's winning this seat and keeping our state red. So I'm in complete agreement with that. As far as how I'm going to vote for leader, well, I look forward to doing that because we do that every 2 years. And I'm going to go back to what Senator Scott said in his plan, because it's getting to a little bit of what these guys are also talking about, term limits. He also had in his plan that we need to have term limits. And that's what I did an honor pledge for day one. 2 terms and I'm out, just like George Washington. Because we need people that want to go there to serve a toward duty, not to go put up a tent and make it a
Thank you,
life
Ms.
career.
Eastman.
Mr. McCrory, you mentioned President Biden's recent Supreme Court nominee. If you were in the United States Senate, what criteria would you use to consider this nomination? What questions would you ask? What are you looking for? Is it policy leaning? Is it party?
I'm looking for someone who follows the Constitution. I mean, the founders of our Constitution were brilliant, the separation of powers. The Supreme Court's supposed to interpret the law, not make the laws. And sadly, a lot of the liberal justices, both current and past, try to make laws as opposed to interpret the law. And based upon the record that I've seen of the justice that was just appointed by Joe Biden, is she has a record of trying to make law as opposed to interpret the law. If she wants to make law, go run for the legislative branch. That's their responsibility. Go run for the executive branch if you want to then implement the law, which Joe Biden is not doing at our border right now. We're supposed to uphold the laws and Constitution of the United States of America. I've taken that oath as a governor and a mayor, and I hope to do it as a U.S. Senator, but Joe Biden is not enforcing the laws of the border of our immigration, and he's got to start now, because he's breaking the Constitution by not enforcing immigration laws that are on the books.
Mr. Walker.
I was giving a speech when a group of Black Lives Matter came in and interrupted the speech. So I engaged them. They asked questions for some time, and they finally said, you seem, or at least talking about all this inclusivity, tell us what your staff looks like. So I began to name them one after one after one of different people of color, different minority communities. But I said this, I said, you know what? I didn't hire them because they were black or brown. I hired them because they were the best. I just looked in more places. When we have Joe Biden, who is selecting people at the highest court in the land based on the stereotypes or predisposed criteria, I find that problematic. Doesn't mean that we don't celebrate. You're looking at the guy, the only member of Congress that's won the United Negro College President's Award. I'm very proud of that. But we have to put the best people in the best positions across this country to keep the America the great sovereign nation that it is.
Ms. Eastman.
I would say you found something we all agree on pretty consistently here. We want the next person that serves on the Supreme Court to be someone that follows the law and doesn't interpret, follows the Constitution. They need to be qualified, period. Don't put anything else behind that. Just qualified, right? And so that's the idea. I would take this part of this role of being a U.S. Senator very seriously, because that is one of the very few defined aspects of being a senator that's important. And so absolutely, it has to be someone that follows the Constitution, period.
Just peeling back the onion a little bit, and we'll set up a new timer for the question. The questions you would ask: would you reject a Supreme Court nominee because they had a different public policy leaning than you? Is qualifications the most important? What are you asking them when you are there in the confirmation hearing?
Whose turn is it?
Yeah, where do you want us to start?
Let's start with you, Ms. Eastman.
Look, they also, when you look at qualifications, are you going to be impartial? Are you going to read through and interpret the law as it's written? I mean, that's what it's about. You don't want anyone that wants to legislate from the bench. And we all just covered that. We all talked about that. So that's what's important.
It's a constitutional republic that we're fighting for. It's what Ben Franklin said when asked when he came out of a Constitution Hall in 1787, what have you given us? A republic, if you can keep it. That Constitution is a protected document. It's something that all other worlds and governments have strived to do but have never mastered, because I believe that it was God ordained that these men would come together at that particular time. Did we get it all right day one? No, but the great thing about America is that we never quit trying until this became the land of opportunity for every American. So if this lady is not interested in following the Constitution, she would never have my vote as U.S. Senator, and I will tell you, I think there's already enough background to let me know that I would never vote to confirm her or anybody else who took the law or the Constitution and mangled it and put it in their own hands.
I can't say it better than Mark, but I also would like to say that I think we've got too many people coming from the Ivy League schools, especially Harvard. Maybe we need a little diversity and get people from throughout the country who maybe attended small colleges like I did.
So it sounds like you're making a new qualification.
Yes, let me finish here for a second.
Yeah, please do. Our universities, our woke universities, we've lost our universities, and now that same wokeness is coming into our K through 12 schools. It's got to end. And that wokeness, we do not want to come anymore to the Supreme Court. It's taken over our society right now. The cancel culture and the woke culture, it's got to end. And maybe the first step is, we've got enough Harvard people in the Supreme Court right now. Let's get some diversity of thought, and let's follow the Constitution.
Thank you. And you bring up a good point. A lot of people have been talking recently about education, about reform, about wokeness, as you said. Mr. Walker, let's start with you on this one. From kindergarten to college, decision rights over public school experience are being debated around the country, from curriculum to the culture in the classroom. Is public education ripe for reform, and what role could Congress play in that process?
Yeah, it's been ripe for reform for about 60 years. That's when the indoctrination stuff began into the minds of our children, creating a generation who believe that government is their end-all for everything or any adversity they could have in life. And the only person, as we've talked about several times, authored the A+ Act, I got it to the House floor in my second year in Congress. I was told I could never get enough votes to even get it to the House floor. Had 191. I needed 218 for it to pass. Our own Republican legislator chairman voted against it. I was disappointed with that. Here's what it said, is that it would strip away every single bureaucratic decision making. Not any of the funding that comes, about 10% comes from the federal to our state for education. No stripping away the funding, but every decision made would never be in the hands of any DC bureaucracy, but would only be in the hands of the state and local communities.
We got to regain our universities, start teaching about capitalism, the U.S. Constitution, and things that are important to help people actually get jobs. That's why when I was governor, instead of throwing bonds into new student unions or into new football stadiums, guess what I did with the bonds that I initiated here in North Carolina? They're building new engineering buildings and science buildings and medical schools where there are actually real jobs that are available that America needs. The American dream. We need to start talking about the American dream in our schools, not dividing us and trying to balkanize us and separate us in our elementary schools and our universities. It's got to end. The strength of America, the strength of the American dream is the melting pot of America, the assimilation of people of different races and different colors and different religions and different thoughts. Our universities and our schools are doing just the opposite, and that's got to end. We see what happens with balkanization in Europe right now. We do not want that to happen with liberal initiatives in America.
Thank you, Mr. McCrory. Ms. Eastman.
Thank you. Education has been one of my top 3 priorities from day one because, again, you're looking at the mom. My little boy was in 2nd grade when this pandemic started, and parents sitting in this room and listening, they know that our children have had 3 academic years impacted, and learning loss is real. We cannot afford to lose this generation. So we must prioritize the education system because it's not only a moral imperative, but it's also important for our economy. Because any nation that out-educates us, well, they're going to outperform our economy, right? And so this is the other aspect to it. You guys have probably heard the word domestic terrorists used towards parents. Well, I reject that. That is absolutely ridiculous and noise. I've fought terrorists. How dare you? Let me tell you this, parent voices matter, and I will always listen to parents as your U.S. Senator.
Mr. McCrory, in state government, which you are aware, the bulk of the state budget goes to education. But as a U.S. Senator, of course, you'll be at the federal level. My question for all of you, what is the role of the federal government in education? And what legislation would you write as a U.S. Senator from North Carolina related to education?
First of all, I want the role of the federal government to be very, very small, if at all. If anything, I want to make sure we don't give grants. There are a lot of federal grants given out to primarily universities and some other types of schools. We want to make sure the grants are spent on things that actually help our kids get jobs as a part of indoctrination, which is happening in a lot of our university campuses right now. We got to encourage at the federal level more choice. As governor, I was one of the leaders of having charter schools and home schools and more choice and opportunity scholarships that are not just reserved for public schools, traditional public schools. I did that as a governor. I had my teaching degree, by the way. I got my teaching degree. My goal was to be a teacher. And now what we need to do is we need to protect our students and the parents from these types of indoctrination and get them to learn the basics and get them to have the skills necessary to get a job, especially when employers right now throughout the United States and especially North Carolina can't find qualified people to take their jobs. It's one of the biggest challenges we have in the United States right now. Our schools have got to get back to teaching skills.
Thank you. Ms. Eastman.
Well, I agree with you, Governor, that the government does not need to be in all of our local decisions. We need to have limited government. But there is a role. There is absolutely. And where I think that our U.S. Senator needs to put some weight and lean in is civics. We need to make sure our children are being taught nonfiction, not CRT. So that needs to be a focus from that seat as your U.S. Senator, is that we make sure consistently across our country that children are taught to be proud, because they need to remember. Do you remember the 13 names I read at the very beginning? I serve next to men and women who gave their life for our country. They gave their life for this right here, freedom of speech. They gave their lives for us to live our American dreams. Our children need to be told those stories, and they need to be proud of our country because they have every reason to be.
Mr. Walker.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Pat, it's not too late to be a teacher. You look pretty good. So, yeah, so got some time there.
Let me say,
I can make a call. So, yeah.
It would be a promotion for any of the jobs that we're seeking at this point in time.
No question, my friend, no question. Listen, you heard him just say about the federal government being very small. I want it to be so small you can't even see it. In fact, I want the federal government's role to be non-existent when it comes to parents educating their children. I have the same general consultant, a guy by the name of Jeff Rowe, that ran Glenn Youngkin's campaign. That was the winning issue. Every now and then these crazy leftist radical actually say out loud what they believe. And when he said the parents do not have a responsibility in dictating or even advising on what their children should be taught, I think that's ludicrous. I talked about my A+ Act. Once again, I don't have to promise you we've delivered, and we'll continue to do that as your next U.S. Senator.
Since he referred to me briefly, I'll just say this too.
You got a career for me?
We need to say this. There's a guy named George Soros that is spending billions of dollars, first of all, trying to get the Democratic nominee elected in North Carolina, but he's pouring billions of dollars and hundreds of millions of dollars into our education system, doing exactly what we want. Mr. Budd here, by the way, Soros was the majority owner of the Budd company, seed company. People don't know that, but he was the majority. George Soros was the majority owner. He's not here to defend himself. That's his fault. But George Soros is trying to take down this country and our education system and our political system. And we've got to do everything we can to fight George Soros at this point in time.
And Congressman Walker, I'm proud that you mentioned me as well. When he mentioned Youngkin, I actually have a nickname, two that I've heard of at least. I've been called the North Carolina Youngkin because I'm listening to parents. I'm the fresh voice and the political outsider that wants to serve North Carolina. And in wrapping up this whole topic, I will absolutely keep education first, and I will always listen to parents. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, well, listen, as a father of a daughter that's in public schools, I understand where you're coming from, and we're going to make sure that my daughter and every other children has every opportunity to make sure they're fully educated to the full extent we can.
Sure. So I can't remember who started that one. That was good. All right.
We're all friends. It's okay.
Absolutely.
So we're back to Ms. Eastman.
Okay, all right, Miss Eastman. One thing that did come up in the last discussion was we're talking about federal overreach. The federal government has expanded that overreach, particularly during COVID, and that's something a lot of folks have been concerned about. Is there a particular part of federal overreach into individual liberties that alarms you? And what, as a U.S. Senator, do you feel like the Senate could do and you could do to try and protect those individual liberties?
Can I just say yes? Yes, there's overreach. I mean, that's the part, we're all tired of being told what to do, right? And that's so much of where we're all at a breaking point. And yes, I don't think the government should be mandating, what we know at the local level. I mean, we've got to keep the power at the individual level and for families at the family level. And so I don't think you're going to get a different answer from any of us. That's the spirit of being a conservative, a good conservative, is that you keep that guidelight on. And so that is absolutely how I will lead as a U.S. Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
So, being the ranking member on intelligence and counterterrorism for our Homeland Security Subcommittee in Washington, D.C., we did some deep dives on this, how it originated, how it came out of the Wuhan lab. We still don't know for sure whether it was premeditated, specifically how it got loose, but it caused international harm. A lot of families suffered from it. But in the words, I believe it was Democrat Minority Whip James Clyburn or somewhere in the Democratic leadership, they said this: never let a crisis go to waste. Now think about that. A pandemic, and their instinct is to never let a crisis go to waste. And they didn't. So they used COVID to literally fast track some things. Specifically, they used it to see how much liberty Americans were willing to surrender. And frankly, they were surprised just how much liberty Americans were willing to surrender. Not only that, they used it in several states to literally override their state constitutions, declaring a state of emergency to send out mass ballots that were funded by George Soros and other liberals to help change the very election law. It's real, and we've got to fight against it.
Mr. McCrory.
Well, it was insulting to watch our governor and our president implement things based upon, quote, science, because it wasn't science, it was politics. I mean, think about North Carolina. We closed the bars but kept the breweries open. We closed the churches and the gyms but kept adult nightclubs open as long as they had buffets. We made junior high basketball players wear masks while running around the track or shooting basketball, and yet at Carolina and Duke and the Charlotte Hornets, they didn't have to wear masks. The virus knew the difference. It was a joke, and we lost the trust of government because they said it was science when some of it was science, but some of it was pure politics. And we've got to take the politics out of science. And right now, politics is taking over science. And the COVID was a perfect example. And a lot of people suffered, a lot of small businesses. You know, we kept the Walmarts open and the Lowe's open, but we closed the small retail mom and pop store. It wasn't based upon science. It had to do with lobbyists in Washington and in Raleigh.
Thank you.
Science is important, but let's don't politicize it.
You all talk about struggling businesses, and we've talked about inflation, we've talked about the role of the federal government. There's a labor shortage in almost every industry, whether it's the service industry, whether it's childcare. My question for all of you, and I believe this question now goes to Mr. Walker first. As a U.S. Senator, what is your role, what can be done legislatively to not just reduce unemployment, although it is at very low levels right now, but how do we fix this? And how do we get more people working in the jobs that need to be filled?
Well, the candidate who's not present today likes to talk about he's the only one that signs the front of the check. That's not accurate. And when I sign the front of the check, there's not two names, there's just one name. And I will tell you this, until you've experienced or paid out paychecks or had to made a payroll, I don't know that you fully understand this. I don't think career politicians, I didn't get to Congress until I was 45 years old. I understand what it means sometimes. I remember getting to Congress and my chief of staff coming in the second week, and he said, "Boss, I don't know how to share this with you, but it was a Wall Street Journal or something." He said, "You just got ranked as the least wealthy member of the 114th class." Look, it's who I am, right? But making sure these folks, you know who's been hit through a lot of this is our farmers. When President Donald Trump, Kristi Noem, Ron DeSantis, and myself worked to make sure our farmers were protected, only Ted Budd voted against these farmers. I want people to look that up. He said, you know why he had to do it? Because his DC super PAC scored against it. They called me and told me to vote against it. They called Mr. Budd, told him to vote against it. He had to vote against it. I stood with our people because I understand how important small businesses are.
Mr. McCrory.
Let me tell you what I actually accomplished. We saw there was a shortage of truck drivers and medics in North Carolina. So what did I do? I saw a lot of people coming home, and I commend you for your military service coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq. Guess what I did? I found out a lot of them knew how to drive trucks, but we required them to go back through truck training and go to school to learn how to drive a truck. But I said they already know how to drive a truck in very difficult circumstances, even worse than some of the North Carolina roads. They know how to drive a truck. So guess what we did? We passed a law. I initiated that law to go, you don't have to go through training if you just test out and prove you can drive a truck. The same thing with medics in the military. I went to Fort Bragg and kicked off this program where a lot of young 30-somethings were leaving the military after the service, and instead of making them step away from work and put money into our education, they got a job right away, a certificate. This is the common sense thinking we need in Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to bring a movement for common sense to Washington, D.C., now more than ever.
Thank you.
And this is the common sense examples that I've done it.
Thank you. Ms. Eastman.
Well, I agree. Veterans are not afraid to work. And we're also not afraid to do tough things either. So to your question that you asked, You know, during the weeknight, when my son finishes up homework, sometimes we sneak away to Chick-fil-A and we'll go get a chocolate shake.
Now we're
And
agreeing.
A couple of months ago, we went there and I pulled up, and in the parking lot there were no cars, so I knew what was going on. But my little boy said, "Well, Mom, let's go and knock on the door. Maybe there's someone there." So we get out of our car and I go to the door, and like so many of us, there was that paper taped to the front that said, "Due to shortage of staffing, our hours have changed." Have we seen that? We've all seen that, right? My little boy turned to me and he said, "Mom, I hate the pandemic." And I said, "I do too, hon." And how do we fix this? The story is this. We have to do the hard work, and we have to be fiscal conservatives again. And I will be a fiscal conservative that is not beholden to anyone, because I'm the political outsider, and I don't owe anyone anything.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
Yes, I think I started this question, but I'm happy to go back again.
Yeah,
Yes.
I have the follow-up question, which is, look, in our own reporting at ABC 11, when we're talking with the business owners, whether they're restaurants, whether they're trucking companies, whether they're child care facilities, wages, they say, is a big reason why people are not taking these jobs. 30 seconds to each of you. Do you support raising the federal minimum wage? And if so, to what? Mr. Walker.
Sure, happy to start. I have a friend of mine who ran a yogurt shop there in Greensboro, North Carolina, and he paid what he thought was a fair wage, $7 or $8 an hour. And it's a ma and pa store, about 5 or 6 employees. If you were to come in as a federal government and you were telling him that you're going to have to go $12 or $15 an hour, there would be no yogurt shop. Talk to Seattle about mandatory minimum wages. It's ruining small businesses. So in the 30 seconds that I have, my time is already wrapping up. No, I would not vote for a federal wage increase. I like to leave that up to the free markets.
Mr. McCrory.
I've always believed the minimum wage should increase slightly based upon the cost of living, like we do other types of benefits. Very small increases based upon the cost of living, because I am listen, right now no one's paying the minimum wage. We can't find people to take $20 an hour jobs because the government was paying them more for not working. I have employers who say, I can't find people no matter what I pay them because I'm competing against our own government. And that's what I stopped in the state of North Carolina. And then I see 5 years later, both Republicans and Democrats vote for legislation to pay people more not to work than to work. Ted Budd, in fact, Congressman Budd, is the first recommendation he made as a U.S. Senate candidate was to pay people using unemployment money to go back to work.
Thank you, Mr. McCrory.
He was growing the nanny state.
Thank you.
It's the craziest idea I've ever heard.
Do you want me to
and some
interrupt so I
Republicans
can
almost
start?
voted for it.
Ms. Eastman.
Thank you, Ms. Eastman.
So what was it? 20 years ago, it was about $2 difference in the minimum wage. That's not keeping up. But does the government need to come in and, no, we don't need more government. We need to be free market Republicans, and we need to empower businesses. That's how we fix this. Is the current minimum wage a living wage? No, it's not. That means we need to figure out ways to empower businesses, small businesses, large businesses. That's how we operate as conservatives.
Thank you. Mr. McCrory, I believe you have the first one for this next one. The John Locke Foundation did a survey of the top policy priorities for Republican primary voters. Election integrity was listed as among the top issues that North Carolina Republican primary voters were interested in. North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis is part of a bipartisan group that's supporting the Electoral Count Act, reforming it, and those reforms may include things like potentially raising the threshold for challenging election results, giving poll watcher workers additional protections from harassment. Some of those features are in that act. Do you support a reform effort, and what would your priorities be if you were in the Senate and on that negotiating team? Well,
first of all, we need to be role models on integrity, and as a city council member, I need to tell Marjorie also, I know you're new to North Carolina and you're also new to the Republican Party, but we have a tradition in North Carolina that we need to continue, and that is this, that we have a lot of part-time politicians, cities, council members, county commissioners, school board members, which we need Republicans to run for more now than ever. So we need to keep that tradition in North Carolina to allow people to keep their jobs and work part-time in cities and towns across North Carolina. That is not a career politician. That is a public servant. And I was proud to do it as a city councilman and as a mayor. My gosh, we need more people to do that. And that's where integrity is set. And I'm proud of my record of integrity. Yes, I would support those efforts, and I look forward to reviewing them.
So I'd like to have my rebuttal now. Real quick.
30 seconds.
Governor, you can refer to me as Mrs. Eastman. And next, did you serve in the military? No, so let me help you out. So the military tells you where to live. 20 years ago, I was assigned here at Fort Bragg, and that's actually where I met my husband. And the military moved us all around since, and we knew this would be our forever home. We were actually stationed in Texas at one point, and they have these bumper stickers that say Native Texans. They're very proud. And I saw one once where Native was crossed out and it said Texan with the flag, and underneath it said, "Cut me some slack. I got here as fast as I could." Well, when my husband retired from the military, we were proud to come home to North Carolina because we fell in love here in 2002 and 2003. And I'm proud to be a North Carolinian, and I find it particularly insulting that you want to go there. That's very disappointing. Thank you.
Well, we welcome you to the Republican Party, and I'm proud of your
Okay,
I'm
so I'd
proud
like
of
my
your
second
service
rebuttal.
You'll have 60 seconds to
So-
answer our question.
too.
You can use the time however you want.
I don't know what she said.
So my second rebuttal, I
think we're
don't know
limiting
what you're
it to
getting
one
at, but let
rebuttal.
me
One
give you a
rebuttal.
little bit of education there.
Ms. Eastman,
So-
we're limiting it to one rebuttal.
You
So
have
he
your
hit
60
me twice,
you have your
so
60
I'm not
seconds.
allowed to talk about
You
how
have
I'm
your
a
60
Republican.
seconds to answer our question. You may use that 60 seconds however you like.
I'll do that. So when I was in college, I registered as a Republican, and I was proud to vote right away, my first time voting. And when I joined the military after 9/11, when our country was attacked, the last 20 years, I'm the one that served in combat here. I took on the tradition that a lot of military members do, and then they shift over and they registered unaffiliated because the military needs to remain apolitical. And I believe firmly in that. And I'm not ashamed of that. And I am proud of every veteran that does that. That's a long-standing tradition. So yes, I was registered unaffiliated. Guess what, North Carolina? About 30% of the electorate here is registered unaffiliated, and they vote center-right. They like our ideas. So for every unaffiliated voter that's listening right now, I welcome you, because apparently you have to be only a Republican to vote for Pat McCrory.
I need to repeat one more thing. I welcomed you to the Republican Party. I didn't say that to derogatory. I welcome you, and I welcome your military service, and I welcome you to North Carolina. I think it's great. Man, we have so many people moving to this great state, and I think a lot of it might be due to some good government leaders that we had here, where we lower the taxes and make North Carolina more livable. That's fantastic.
You know, I think
Thank
a good
you.
question is in due, right? Let's do a good question.
Thank you. Let's do a question. All right. Well, actually, I'm going to
Mr.
Mr.
Walker.
Walker. I'll reread.
It's up to you. It's up to you.
I'm going to read the question again if you're up
Sure.
for that. Election
Yes.
integrity is a big
Right.
issue. According to
Was
a
it-
poll from the John Locke Foundation, there is a bipartisan effort to look at some reforms that ensure election integrity, restore trust in the system. What would be your position on those, and what would you be focused on?
Kind of surprised that nobody's talked about voter ID.
Ugh, if I would have
that's-
had my 60 seconds, I would have.
Well, I think that's
We'll
where
talk about it later.
I think that's where we have to start, is make sure the people show up. You know, it's interesting that I find that when we talked about COVID being fast-tracked, Congressman Budd, in January of last year, signed a piece of paper saying that he was pushing back. He would not accept the electoral votes that were signed off in 6 different states. 3 months ago, he was asked by an AP reporter this question: Mr. Budd, was the 2020 election fair and square? He said, yes, Joe Biden is the legitimate president. He said, the reporter followed up with him and said, kind of surprised. He said, so you're saying that Joe Biden won by 7 million votes? He said, yes. This is the guy that's endorsed by President Trump, who's supposed to be out there fighting for us, who the first tough question folds up like a cheap suit. You have to have warriors willing to stand up and fight for this. Look, there's no question that mass ballots were mailed out in multiple states that we will never know who filled the ballots out, who collected them, and sure as heck who mailed them in. And I'm not afraid to say it. We've got to make sure election integrity is on the ballots this coming year.
Please hold your applause.
Well done, sir.
The first person was Mr. McCrory, so now it's Ms. Eastman.
So you just mentioned President Trump, and you mentioned Mr. Budd, who has received President Trump's endorsement. You all want to beat him in the primary, which means that endorsement seemingly would be up for grabs.
Excuse me, we want to beat each other. It has
I
nothing
want to
do-
beat Sherry Beasley for the record, and I will.
I want to be the nominee that serves the people of North Carolina.
What is the role that President Trump and President Trump's policies should play in this election? Ms. Eastman.
Where are we starting now? Is it me?
Yeah.
Ms. Eastman,
Great.
please.
Well, did you guys like the policies of the last administration? Because I thought a lot of them were pretty good. And we need to get back to that and get our country moving forward. And anyone that wants to support me and they believe in my message and they believe in the messenger, well then guess what? I'm Ronald Reagan's big tent. I invite you, let's do this because of what's at stake. We have work to do. So I'm going to now talk about election integrity and use that time a little bit to answer that last question that I couldn't get to. I want to focus on three things. I have a national security background. I'm the only one that has that background and that expertise on this stage and in this race. We must have voter IDs. Governor Cooper, he vetoed it when we, North Carolinians, said we want it. So we need to make sure that's a priority. Number two, rigorous audits always. And number three, we need to make those systems here in America. The most classified and sensitive equipment that I used in combat, it was made here. We need to make sure that those that are counting our ballots, it's made in America.
Mr. Walker.
Yeah, listen, you're looking at the #1 America First pro-Trump policy candidate, not just in North Carolina. We would be the highest rated U.S. Senator, 2 points higher than Ted Cruz. Any chance I had to work with the previous administration, when I was chairman of the Republican Study Committee, I picked up the phone 2 weeks after President Trump and Vice President Pence were inaugurated, and I called and I said, listen, Vice President Pence, if you'll co-host the meetings with me, we'll do two things Republicans have promised for 7 years. We'll repeal the Obamacare mandates and we'll defund Planned Parenthood. Without getting a long story, that's exactly what we did. 3 weeks later, I get a call from the White House. Can you bring your crew over? That Friday morning was the first time that this small-town Southern boy ever walked in the Oval Office. But I did it. They set me next to President Trump. We shook hands because we were able to lead something. So whether it's in the past with my record or whether it's moving forward. But here's the thing. Sometimes you don't get endorsements unless you play ball. Sometimes you don't get endorsements if you're willing to be independent and never sell your voting card. Mark Walker has never sold his voting card, and that's why I'm not taking or haven't taken a single DC Super PAC dollar when the gentleman who's not here has now taken over $8 million.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Mr. McCrory.
President Wright was extremely correct. President Trump was extremely correct, first of all, on foreign policy. The America First policy was right, correct, and it needed to be said. With Iran, with Israel, with China, with North Korea, with Russia. He was right on trade. To finally go, wait a minute, we can't keep treating China as a third world country. He was right on taxes. He was extremely correct on immigration and building the wall. Sadly, the congressional candidate who's second in the polls right now but didn't come, he was pro-Russia in almost every vote he made. He was pro-China. The group that's running millions of dollars of ads against me right now is a pro-China, anti-farming group that is letting you see deceitful ads and mail-outs that are uncalled for in North Carolina. President Trump showed leadership in those areas. The one area I disagreed with President Trump was his fiscal spending, especially at the end during COVID when we started paying people more not to work than to work. We should not have supported that, Republicans and Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. McCrory.
Thank you. In 2020, we're talking about President Trump, of course. North Carolina elected Donald Trump, elected Tom Tillis, Mark Robinson. but also Democrats Roy Cooper and Josh Stein. You know, this is North Carolina. What makes you the best suited Republican to win a statewide election?
Mr. Walker, you're up
Mr.
first.
Walker, you first.
2020 was a big election year. 2016 was a big election year. And I consider the former governor a friend of mine. But when you are running in a statewide race and you win a supermajority of Republicans, up and down the ballot, even Republicans won in Mecklenburg County, and you don't win, it gives me some pause moving forward, whether it's 2016, 2020, or 2024. In the polling, you're looking at close to 70% of the people who have the former governor, they know the former governor, but are looking for somebody else in this U.S. Senate race. Doesn't mean that he hasn't done good things, and we applaud those things. But the great majority, more than 2/3 of Republican primary voters, even though they know the former governor, are not going to vote for him in 2024 or 2022. That's why this vote matters, and that's why you need to have people who can win. We've won all 5 elections, 3 general elections and 2 primaries. Former governor, this is the 4th time he's running. He's only won once. And I think that should give every Republican in the state of North Carolina pause about hitching their wagon to the former governor.
Thank you. Mr. McCrory, please hold your applause.
Well, thank you very much for that applause. I appreciate that. I was the only 3rd Republican governor elected in North Carolina since the Civil War, and there hadn't been one elected since either, I might add. Listen, I initiated policies in the state of North Carolina not to win the next election, but to help the next generation. And I stand by every decision that I made. I fought for every one of you. I fought for every one of you. And I stood up to the values of North Carolina, and it might have cost me the election. But don't we need some people in Washington, D.C. who care more about the next generation than the next election, now more than ever? That's what I did. And I had George Soros. He went after, in my election, they had George Soros go after the governor's race, the attorney general race, and the state Supreme Court. They won all 3. They left everything else alone. We're going to have George Soros again, even despite the connections to our own Republican candidate.
But it wasn't Democrats who weren't voting for you, it was Republicans.
Excuse me, we're still speaking here. I'm proud of my work. George Foreman's one of my heroes. When you get knocked down, you get up and swing again. That's the American dream. How many of you have been knocked down and had to get back up again?
Thank you, Mr. McCrory.
Every one of us. That's the American dream. That's the American way, and I'm going to do just that. I did it in 2008 and 2012, and I'll do it again right now.
Thank you. Ms. Eastman.
Thank you very much.
After 9/11, when I was registered Republican, I said, no one does that to my country. No one does that to my country. How can I help? And I joined the military, and I served, and I fought for this country. I fought for this country, and I put my life on the line for this country because I love our country. I love our country. You fast forward 20 years to that disastrous fall of Afghanistan, which was reckless and completely avoidable. I said again, how do I help? Because I love my country, and no one does this to my country. And the root of these problems is failed leadership because of career politicians. I can win in the general election because I'm the North Carolina Yunkin. I'm the fresh voice and the outsider. I want to serve my country again. And I believe North Carolina wants a fresh voice, a combat veteran, and a mom as their next U.S. Senator.
Thank you, Ms. Eastman. And thank you to all of you. This is actually the end of our question portion of the debate, and I thank you all for a civil, substantive, engaging conversation about policy. We can do it. It is possible. The candidates will now have 1 minute each to offer their closing statements. We will work in reverse order from their opening statements. So, Ms. Eastman, we will start.
90 seconds.
90 seconds.
Is it 90 seconds?
Yes, 90
If it's-
seconds. Thank you.
If it's
your script
reverse
is wrong.
order,
My
the
fault.
governor's to start.
Yeah, I'm first, I
Yes,
think.
so please.
You're right.
in reverse.
You're
I
right.
was never good at math.
We know
counting.
that about the media.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. McCrory, 90 seconds.
First of all, let me compliment everyone who's running for the U.S. Senate. It takes courage to do that. By the way, there are about 5 other people running that weren't invited to this event, but some really great people from throughout North Carolina that are coming to a lot of our events. I'm sad to see someone who didn't have the courage, who was invited, that did not come and would rather be in Florida than in North Carolina. As your next U.S. Senator, I'm going to concentrate on 2 major things. One is safety, and the second is affordability, which are the 2 most important issues in our country at this point in time. The safety of our cities and our neighborhoods and our schools, which the liberal elite are trying to defund our police when I increased funding for police as a mayor. When I targeted the top 100 criminals in the city of Charlotte and reduced the crime rate. Don't we need that kind of leadership in Washington right now more than ever, who has that experience and success rate? The safety of our borders. We haven't even talked about illegal immigration. It's a wide open border. Mr. Budd voted against the wall. He's forgot to tell you that. The wall needs to be built. We need the wall. We need immigration law. And the third thing is the security of our nation right now. And the way we get that security is to become energy independent. And I'm going to fight for our energy independence as a U.S. Senator. This is the American dream. I am more concerned about the next generation than the next election, because we need to make sure that the people who are not in this audience, the people that are just in elementary school today, have the same opportunities that we have as Americans. This is the best of America. And I'm going to bring the best of North Carolina to Washington, D.C. North Carolina solutions to Washington, D.C.'s.
Thank you, Mr. McCrory. Mr. Walker.
There's a battle for our freedoms in the 21st century, something that hasn't been said today. This battle is as much about spiritual warfare than it is politics. Today, we face a new kind of evil. When Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are okay allowing migrants to come across our border, knowing that their children will be assaulted, among other things, that's evil. When members of the United States Congress, when House Democrats vote against sustaining the life of a baby who somehow miraculously survived, that's evil. We have to stand up. We have a battle. Don't lose hope, though, right? People are engaging. I've traveled somewhere between 64 and 67,000 miles across this state, and I am encouraged because moms and dads who just wanted to work hard and raise their family and go to church, they're engaging like never before. School moms, they're kicking these leftist people off these school boards left and right, and I say more power to them. Here's what we have to do. We have to engage. This is no longer somebody else's battle. You're looking at somebody who is the only elected Republican out of more than 1,000 who've been invited to give the commencement address at a historical black college and university. You know why that's important? It's because I want every community to know about individualism, hope, and a constitutional republic, and I want every boy and girl to know their rights do not come from some federal institution. They come from God Almighty, their creator. I've been endorsed by Mike Huckabee, Tim Scott, and sheriffs across this state. And as your next U.S. Senator, I will fight for you just as hard as I fought in the United States House. God bless you, and thanks again to all of our hosts for allowing this debate today.
Thank you. Please hold applause. We're almost there, almost.
It needs an amen.
I'll take it.
I
Thank
like
you.
it.
90 seconds
well
for
done,
Miss Eastman.
Pastor. Well done. This race is not about 4 candidates. It's about 2 choices. You can pick a politician, or you can pick a fresh voice and an outsider who wants to serve her country again. People ask, why the U.S. Senate? I'm always a soldier at heart, and I'm always going to run towards the fight. And the fight is in the U.S. Senate, where our country is deadlocked, and it's going to tip this year. I'm going to tip it right, and I can keep our state red. Let me be very clear. I will beat Sherry Beasley in November. The mission is clear. We need to win the general election. So join me. Become a party crasher. Don't wait to be invited or told what our party and our state is going to look like. You can learn more at marjoriekeastman.com. Go to our social media platforms. You can donate there as well. But let me end with this last thought. Ronald Reagan once beautifully said that the world follows America into tomorrow. Well, I believe that the country follows North Carolina into tomorrow. North Carolina has a purpose, and so do you. We are first in freedom, and let's go be the North Star for our nation's bright future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. Ms. Eastman, Mr. Walker, Mr. McCrory. We appreciate your sharing your policy priorities with us today, and thank you to all of you for attending the Carolina Liberty Conference. I think this was a substantive discussion.
And how about a hand for Jonah Kaplan and Donna King, our hosts today?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Even John.
And don't forget, everyone, including the candidates, can rewatch this debate on abc11.com and on our streaming apps. So
Forever.
enjoy.
All right.
And I think the primary is still March 17th,
Yes.
May 17th.